Hello and welcome. I'm Penny Lane, owner of Business Matters Bookkeeping, a business I've had since 1999, creator of Penny Lane's QuickBooks Now online tutorials, and author of The Brilliant Bookkeeper, My 10 Steps to Building Your Own Brilliant Bookkeeping Business. And speaking of business, I know I have a lot of bookkeepers online based on my survey, and I really appreciate you joining me. And I want to let you know that you can really build a great business by helping contractors with their bookkeeping. My first client was a contractor, and almost my entire early business was built upon contractors. Almost all of my clients were contractors for many, many years. That's because it's a bit complicated, it's a bit time-consuming, it's very important, and a lot of contractors simply don't have time to do all this themselves, so they need your help. Although any contractors I have on the line, I really appreciate you joining me because it's great for you to know how this works. And I do have some contractors that do their own bookkeeping who I've trained and who do a darn good job. So welcome. And an hour is not enough time to cover this entire subject. I've actually taught 8-hour workshops in live workshops on QuickBooks for contractors. It's a bit more time consuming live, and I've managed for online purposes to get this training down to more like 4 hours, about half the time, 4 or 5 hours. And but I think that we can cover quite a lot in an hour, and you're going to get a lot out of this. Although I will offer an expert level training class at the end of this webinar that you can sign up for, and I'll email you that link when we're done. And you can always access me for one-on-one remote screen sharing support. I offer that, and a lot of clients find this a great way to get their specific questions answered, the specific issues cleared up quickly and efficiently. I'm always available to you for that. And just contact me because I mentioned that you were on this webinar and you will get a discount. With that, we don't have a lot of time, and I'm going to be moving at a pretty fast pace through this. I want to respect your time, and I want to get you as much information as I can. So today, the subjects I'm going to cover are the most requested as well as the most important, the things that you really want to know. And we're going to touch on some other things as we go through. But the main things that we're going to focus on today are your item list, which is an amazingly large subject. It sounds simple and innocuous, but it's the foundation of your entire job costing system. We're also going to go over the billing options, progress billing, and time and materials billing, as well as take a look at your reports and how those all tie together. With that said, I would like to get started. In our sample company file here, let's take a look at our item list. This item list, first of all, the definition of an item list in QuickBooks is items that things that you buy and sell, which sounds pretty innocuous. And items for most businesses are a pretty simple issue. You need an item if you're going to bill a customer on an invoice, for instance, because there is no way to directly contact yourself to the general ledger or the chart of accounts, the category list, whatever you like to call it. You need to have an item. And also items like for my business, I would say we have an item called hourly consulting. And that would be something I would put on my invoice to bill you for. Maybe I would have a certain rate that was built in. It would help me fill out the form. But for contractors, the item list takes on an entirely new meaning. In talking about the things that you buy or sell, this particular item list is for a general contractor. You can see that we've got things on here like plans and permits, site work, excavation, concrete, masonry, framing. These are all items that would be for a general contractor. If you're a specialty contractor, like you're an electrical contractor, your item list might be as small as this, just electrical, or you might have service electric labor and things like that. So the first thing you want to do before you even think about job costings is get your item list established. and figure out what you want to have on it. And the services that you provide are only the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot else that's involved here. The reason that the items are so important is because all of the job costing reports in QuickBooks are based on items. If you've ever run a job costing report and you had something on it called no item, or the whole thing didn't make any sense, it's just because you don't have it set up right or you just aren't quite sure how to use it. Also, items are set up in a very specific way for job costing. Very specific way. And this is where I see most people go horribly, terribly wrong, is that they set up their items incorrectly and it can just completely whack out your financial statements. And as a result of all this, your entire system of estimates, invoices, and cost entry are based on items. So items are the #1 thing. You need to get that settled first. There are several things that you want to think about when it comes to establishing your item list. And it's tricky because this is the first thing you have to do, but you have to think through the whole picture. And hopefully what I teach you today will help you to see that whole picture well enough to truly comprehend what's the best item list for you. By the way, I do have this item list available in import format, where you can just import it right into your data file or a sample data file, as well as Excel. So if you want that, just email me. I wasn't able to upload it to my WordPress site, so if you'd like to have those, just email me and I will send you those. So the first consideration is what products do you buy and sell. From a general contractor standpoint, we're going to go ahead and say that these are the items that we buy and sell. Next, you need to think about your estimating strategy. And when I say estimating strategy, I don't mean this is how you're going to figure out how much to charge a customer. QuickBooks isn't that type of program. The estimate that you're going to put into QuickBooks is your final estimate of what your costs are with your markup or what you're going to charge your customer. So that your estimate as far as how you're going to charge someone is going to be figured out outside of QuickBooks. And then you just basically plug it into QuickBooks for the purposes of running job cost reports and invoicing your customer. And those are the things that you need to think about. What are your estimates going to look like? Because what do you want to see on the job cost reports, and how are you going to bill your customer? Occasionally there is a conflict between what you want to see on your job costing reports and what you want your customer to see on their bill. And there is actually a way to resolve that using group items, which I do not have time to go over today, but I do have an article on my website, QuickBooksNow.com, under tips and tricks, that is about this specific subject that will help you learn how to use group items. And I also will be covering that in my expert level training. So you have to think about your estimating, your invoicing, which products and services you sell, and also how it's going to reflect on your job cost reports. You also need to think about the practicality for entering costs, because these items are going to be used for both entering your costs and billing your customer. That's how we get the side-by-side comparison reports. And that's something that we're going to see. I'm going to demonstrate for you as we go through today with the system. But just know that plans, when you purchase plans, you're going to use this item. And then when you sell the plans to your customer, you're going to use this item on their invoice. And if you want to use progress invoicing, you need to use that item on your estimate. And then you're also going to get a side-by-side comparison of your plan's cost versus your plan's revenue per customer on your job costing report to see how well you did on each item in your category list or on your item list. The other thing that I'd like to point out is the numbering strategy. There are some standardized numbering formats for contractors that I've used, and those don't work very well in QuickBooks because of the way that QuickBooks sorts the item list by number. if you want your item list to be sorted this way, so we're starting with phases of the job, basically. We start out with plans and permits, we do site work, we do excavation, concrete, masonry, framing, all the way down to the trim and finish, appliances, and flooring. And the reasons that the numbers are this way, 0, 1, and 0, 1.1, etc., is because in QuickBooks, if you use a number on your item in front of your item description, if you use, say, 100, it's going to go ahead and then you get all the way down to like 1100, or you do 10 and you get all the way down to 100. It's going to go ahead and move 100 right up under number 10. So then your list will not be in order by phase. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, it's nice to look at your item list this way. And that's the reason for this numbering strategy, which is a little bit difficult to describe, but just be aware of it. This is the best numbering strategy for keeping your list in this order. It's one that I use all the time. Those are all of the considerations in regard to setting up your item list. However, the most important part of setting up your items has to do with the way the item is set up itself. Let's take a look at framing labor, for instance. The most important thing about setting up your items for job costing is making sure that you have a two-sided item. You get a two-sided item by clicking this box here. And I usually use the item called a service is the type of item. You can also use non-inventory part, but service is the most straightforward and it's best to be consistent. So we'll use service items. And then you need to check this box here that says this service is used in assemblies or is performed by a subcontractor or partner. What in the heck does that mean? It's crazy. It sounds crazy, but what it actually means is that you get a two-sided item. And what does a two-sided item mean? Well, this is a one-sided item. We only get to assign this to one account. But remember, we're going to use the same item for recording our costs that we're going to use for billing our customer so that we can get the comparison report. And to do that, we need to have a two-sided item, where on our purchase transactions being an employee's paycheck, a check, or a bill, we can assign it a cost account. And I don't have time in this to talk about a lot about the chart of accounts. I'll talk about it a little bit more in my extended training. But basically, you want all of your direct to job-related costs to be cost of goods sold accounts. That's the type of account they should be. So we can see here on my purchase transactions, of course, I want it to go to a cost. I don't want my checks that I'm writing to my lumber supplier to go to an income account. That wouldn't make any sense. What it would do is actually reduce my income, which is what I see a lot of people doing when they just use a one-sided item. So when I record my costs, I'm going to use this item. And then on sales transactions being transactions that are billed to the customer, like sales receipts, and mainly for us, it's going to be customer invoices. We want to put that to an income account because when our customer pays us, we need that to show up as income. Another thing that you're going to notice about this scenario here is that unlike some other accounting programs for contractors, each item can only be assigned to one cost account and one income account. So, and one income account is usually not a problem. Although if you have a plumbing or electrical business, you might want to have a separate item for service so that you would have service income showing on your P&L, because you can see this is where your income is going to show on your profit and loss report. So if you had two types of income, you're going to have two sets of items if you want them to show on the P&L that way. And since this is going to job labor costs, if I wanted to keep my item list really simple and only have one item called framing, period, I could just assign it to job-related costs, but I wouldn't get the detail of which what type of cost it was. Was it labor? Was it materials? Was it subcontractor? And that may or may not be important to you. But in this case, we have a separate item for framing labor, or framing materials, so that we can map our materials item to the cost of goods sold account called materials, so that when we look at our P&L, this is not something that I'm going to get to cover a lot today, but when we look at our P&L, we'll be able to see that breakdown. And then again, we have to have one for subcontractor. So this is definitely a consideration when setting up your item list. Each item can only go to one account, and that can be pretty tricky. Do we have any questions about items? Yes. Okay, so for instance, the framing item, just the parent item, is mapped right to job-related costs. It's just general. And your whole item list could look like this and not have any of these sub-items. But then you're not going to get the breakdown on your P&L. Any more questions about items? Yes, I can send you this item list that you can import right into your QuickBooks, or I can send it to you in Excel format as well. If you just email me, penny@quickbooksnow.com. Now we're really going to get to understand what's happening with our items when we get to the next phase. When we get to the end and we get to see the items in action and how they actually work on our data file and with our information. So let's first go to create an estimate for a customer. And the customer I'm going to use is John and Amy Adams. But in order to, I already have a job for John and Amy Adams called Kitchen Remodel. So I'm going to add a job here because they've just hired us to do a bathroom remodel. So you just right-click and you say Add Job, and that's how you get the sub-jobs under here. The first thing that I'm going to do is create the estimate. And I've already figured out how much I'm going to charge them for this job, and I'm just plugging this into QuickBooks now. I'm going to leave the date. This is kind of an old data file that I've been using for my workshops. So the first thing that we're going to charge them for is plan. And in regard to your estimate, there are a couple different ways to handle the estimate price right here. You can either enter your estimated cost and then put your markup over here, or you can just enter the amount that you're going to charge the customer. And on some of the reports that can be a little confusing, but in a lot of ways that's a really simple way of doing things. So I'm going to put in some framing labor. I'll go ahead and break down the hours here. And remember, this is what I'm charging my customer. And then I'm going to do some framing materials. I'm going to do some painting. Maybe I'm going to subcontract my painting. Perhaps I will put some flooring. I think that we might have some plumbing involved here. Getting a little bit ahead of myself. We're going to do some plumbing labor. I don't necessarily need to separate this out in so much detail, but I'm just going to throw one more thing on there. I'm going to throw on some cabinets, and we're going to subcontract out the cabinets. And obviously there's a lot more involved in a bathroom remodel than this, but this is just for our example. Now I'm going to save this estimate. This is a non-posting transaction, so it doesn't hurt anything. And then I'm just going to really quickly post enter a bill so that I have some charges against this, so we can see our items in action. And I'm going to go ahead and enter my bill for a cabinet company for $1,000 for the cabinets and countertops. And this is where the item list gets tricky and where you have to think about how does your item list and how much detail you have it broken down in, and the practicality of coding and entering all of your costs, because if you're the bookkeeper and you're entering this, you have to get this information from someone has to tell you what this bill from a cabinet company is for. Probably you can figure out that it's for cabinets, but you'll need to know how it relates back to the original estimate. So it's good to have an item list that will give you all the detail that you want, but at the same time will not overcomplicate your life so much that it's impossible to get it into the system correctly. So I could just use the main system, right? The main item, cabinets and countertops. But I think we use subcontract. So I'm going to use subcontract. And then for the customer job, I'm going to choose the bathroom model. And it's pretty important that you choose this. If you don't choose the sub job and then you run a cost report on that, or you try to bill those costs out, it's going to be wrong. Notice this billable box here. The billable box can be a source of frustration for a lot of people. And I will say that depending on your system, it's okay to leave the billable box checked on everything, even things that you're not going to bill out, unless you're using a very strict system in which you either mark things billable or not billable, and you run reports to show anything that is not billed so that you make sure that everything gets billed. A lot of times you just handle it on a job-by-job basis. Like, I'm not going to be billing out this is a contract job, so I'm not worried about it. So it doesn't really cause a problem. In this case, I am going to leave it checked because I also want to demonstrate to you time and materials billing. Classes, I don't have time to talk about today, but I will go into that more in my expert level training. Let's go ahead and save this so that we have some cost posts for this job. Oh my goodness, I forgot to tell you something. Something really important. Notice when we entered this bill that we did not use the expenses tab. The expenses tab is what you use for things like advertising, computer supplies and equipment, dues and subscriptions, rent, cleaning, janitorial. You never want to use this for your direct job-related costs, at least not if you want to get involved in job costing and you want to do it this way. You want to use the items tab. And this is where we come in. We use the same item on our estimate. We're going to use the same item to bill our customer. We're going to use the same item to post our costs. And that's how we're going to get our comparison report. Very important. All right, we posted that. I'd also like to go ahead and post some time to this job under the employees menu. And don't let this throw you off that the enter time is under the employees menu, because you can enter anybody's time on a timesheet and it will not have any effect on cost whatsoever unless and until you bring that into payroll. But I can enter time on here for an owner, for a subcontractor, for things I am going to bill, for things I'm not going to bill. I can enter my time. But normally what you're going to have is your employees are going to need to complete a detailed timesheet to separate out their time by types of work that they're doing and by job. And I've even gone so far. Usually what I do is I have a spreadsheet that pretty much looks like this that the employees fill out. And sometimes they even have the item list printed on the back so that the employee can reference the item list and know that they're coding their time cards correctly, because I, the bookkeeper, then need to enter all of this time in here so that the time and the cost get applied to the job appropriately. And this guy obviously has way too much time, but I'm going to go ahead and enter some more time in here for him, and I'm going to enter some framing labor. And don't worry about the payroll item. We're not going in too far into payroll on this one. And it's just telling me that payroll's already been processed. It's not going to work. And again, notice the billable box. I'd like to enter a different type of time for this employee. I'm going to go ahead and enter some time under plumbing, just for an example. And normally we would not be using officer's labor, so please ignore that. And I'm going to leave these billable as well. Now, no cost is going to show on our job costing report for this because I have not pulled this in and run it as payroll. So if you enter time on here and then you go look at your job cost reports, you have to know that the time entered on the timesheet does not reflect any cost until it's actually been processed through payroll. Very, very important. Time and cost are not associated with each other in QuickBooks except for running payroll and if you want to bill your, when you bill your customer for a job. All right, now we've got our estimate in, we've got some costs in, and we've got some time in. Let's take a look now at what it's going to look like when we go ahead and create an invoice. We're going to start off with the progress invoice example. This is where you bill intermittent amounts or something. All right, so here's our bath remodel job. And the first thing that happens when I have an open estimate is it's going to pop up as an available estimate whenever I put the customer's name into the customer job field and I tab out of it. And this window is going to come up and say you have available estimates to create invoices from. And I'm going to say yes. I'm going to select this estimate to create an invoice. Then this window comes up. And this window gives us a few different options. We've got the options to create an invoice for the entire estimate, a percentage of the entire estimate, or for selected items or different percentages of each item. That's a mouthful, but the third option is the most dynamic. I'm going to show you what it looks like if we just bill for, a certain amount of the entire estimate. What it's actually going to do is bill for 30% of each line item. See how that works? But I really want to show you how it works when we use option 3, because this is the option that a lot of people use. Now I get this window that shows me line by line what my estimated amount is, any prior amounts that have been billed for that line item or that phase, and the amount that I'm billing here. I can either bill an amount or I can bill a percentage. So for this invoice, I'm going to go ahead and bill for the permit. I'm going to bill for some of this framing labor because I know that I'm going to have to pay my guys to do that. And I'm going to bill for, let's say I want to bill for 90% of my cabinets and countertops. I'll say OK. And then this message that comes up here is about a preference in regard to progress invoicing, which I'll show you in just a moment. And this is our billable time cost, which we're not using right now, but that will come in handy when I'm doing that in a minute. What we see now is our invoice, and here it is. Here are the amounts that in that window I specified I wanted to bill. In 2013, you've got this progress button. You can click on it and actually go and change that around if you like. Let's see what this looks like for the customer. This is what the customer is going to see. And you can absolutely work with this template and change it up to make it just how you want it. Customize it. But here's what the customer is seeing. the prior amount, the current percentage, the total percentage, and this is the amount they're getting billed for here. And you'll notice that they're seeing everything, even the things that we're not billing for on this invoice. And that's what that preference was talking about that I'm going to show you. A lot of times this is a great way to show the customer their invoice, but sometimes you don't want them to see those zero amount items. And in that case, you can go up here to Edit, Preferences, Jobs and Estimates, Company Preferences. And you're going to have to turn this on. If you don't have this on, which you should if you have the Premier edition of QuickBooks for Contractors, but if you don't, you need to turn on creating estimates and doing progress invoicing in this preference. But if I click this box here, don't print items that have zero amount, then my invoice is going to look a little bit different. Now my the items I'm not billing for on this invoice aren't showing at all. That's really, truly a preference, and you can just turn it on and off, like if you have some customers you want to see and some you don't want to see, et cetera, et cetera. What if you don't want your customer to see any of this nonsense? What if you just want them to see one line item, I'm billing you for 20% of the whole contract? That's where group items come in, which I don't have time to cover, but again, on QuickBooksNow.com, under QuickBooks Tips and Tricks, you can see my article about group items, and you can also learn about this in my expert level training. But let's go ahead and save this invoice. And I'm going to show you what it looks like when we go to create another invoice. The estimate is still active. It's still got things on it that need to be billed, so it's still going to come up. I want to create an invoice for selected items or different percentages. And now let's see, I want to bill them for this one. You can see that now it shows you the prior amount and the prior percentage. This is really helpful when you're going to bill the rest of it. And now I'm just going to bill for $500. See what that one looks like. We don't show our zero amount items, so we can't really see everything else that happened on there. But you can see here that your prior amounts and your total percentages are listed on this invoice, which we can show if we want to add zero amount items back to it. Very interesting. This is how you do progress invoicing. And I want to warn you a little bit about progress invoicing, because I've had a couple of things go awry for people. And you have to be very careful. If you're in a progress invoicing sequence, you can't go back like 2 or 3 invoices ago and change it. You just can't. Because it's going to completely foul up the way that QuickBooks is tracking it is like each time the invoice is created. It's not going to fix it. If you need to fix an invoice that you just did, okay, but not the invoice before another one that's been created, not one before that. If you have to do that, then you have to recreate all of the, you have to go back to that invoice you need to change, void all of the invoices after it, and recreate them all. And I've also had people foul this up a little bit by, like, there was a quantity here, and the person saw it show up, and so instead of getting rid of the quantity, he just zeroed out the rate. But that does not work. That will foul up your billing to no end. So be careful about stuff like that. And we had to go back and void a whole bunch of invoices and start them all over again, because you just can't fix something once you've saved the invoice and posted it that way. All right, so I'm not going to save this second invoice created. I just wanted to show it to you. Do we have any questions about progress invoicing? Okay, cool. Any questions? Now let's take a look at time and materials invoicing. We're going to just bypass this estimate by saying cancel. And now we get this box that comes up. And this is the thing that will confound people who don't uncheck the billable box on everything that they enter. And then they have this thing coming up all the time. It drives them crazy, even on things that they're not going to bill. If you want to get rid of this window, keep it from popping up, you can click here, say save this as a preference, and say OK, and this will stop coming up. Of course, you can still choose add time cost from up here in the menu anytime that you need to. But you don't have this thing coming up and bugging you. But I kind of like it to come up and let me know when I have billable time and cost. Select the outstanding billable time and cost and add to this invoice. Let's do it. The first tab we're going to see is the time. And here is the time that we entered for our employee Chris Pepper on this job. And you'll notice that there is no rate here. Rates are entered either they're associated with the item. So on your item list, you have a sales price, and or they are listed under the billing rate under the employee, which is not something I have time to go into right now, but just know that you can have different billing rates for different items and or different billing rates for different employees, and even different billing rates for different employees on certain items. And then those rates will automatically populate here. And one of the reasons why that's important is because you have some options here as far as how you want your time to show up on the invoice. The first option we have is to enter a separate line on the invoice for each activity. What that means is that there's going to be 3 lines on this invoice. Every day or every day/item, every line item I put on that timesheet is going to show here, and it's going to show on the customer's invoice. We can transfer the notes from that employee's time card if we type those in when we put in the time. We can transfer only the item descriptions, framing, or we can transfer both if we want to enter that much detail. Or we can combine all of the activities with the same service item and rate. For this, we only have one employee. We don't have any specified rates on him. But so framing is going to go on one line, and plumbing is going to go on a different line. And that's as far as that's the most choices we have. We don't have a choice to just combine all of a person's time or everybody's time and put it on one line item. If you want to do that, you wouldn't use this to populate your timesheet. You would use like a report to get that information. However, if you don't use this, if you have time that's marked billable and you don't use this feature to populate the invoice and clear them out, they will remain unbilled. So that's just something to consider. Of course, you can do all kinds of workarounds with it, but that's an important thing to consider. So let's see what it looks like when we put our time on each line item. And we could add a column actually to this that had the service date, and it would actually pull in the date from the employee's time card. So sometimes that's helpful. I've used this, or this is how I build customers. I've also used it in this other way. Go back to our add time cost. I'm going to have to get rid of these. Notice I haven't saved anything. The only reason I'm allowed to manipulate this. So let's choose the option of combining activities with the same service item and rate. And let's see what that looks like. Then I put all of our framing labor on one date or on one line item. Obviously, the service date field, if we added it to the template, isn't going to help us. It's not going to have the right date because it's combining dates. And I could have 4 or 5 guys if they all had framing labor and they were all the same billing rate, they would show on the same line. But it can be really helpful if you do have like apprentice and you have journeyman and so on and so forth on the same job. You can actually separate out your bill real easily just by assigning billing rates. This is a pretty big subject. The other thing that you could do is you could use the class fields to put in your employee's name if you weren't using classes for anything else, and you could have that show up on the invoice if that was important to your billing process. I had all kinds of customers, and I had a client who was very transparent and had to provide all this information in great detail to their client, and I was able to do it by doing this. Now let's look at our items. I don't get into mileage, and you want to avoid getting sucked into expenses. We just use items. Remember, we're contractors. items, items, items. So here's the bill that we entered for the countertop. We're going to go ahead and select that because we want to add that to the invoice. And again, if I wanted to use the class so that when I was entering this bill for the customer, or at the time that I entered the bill, that's when I have all the detail in front of me. And if I, for some reason, wanted that detail on the invoice, I could use the class to put the vendor's name, like a cabinet company, so which is redundant at the time of entering the bill, but not when it gets over here. And that's because even if I am entering the bill and I type over the item description, when I get here, it's always going to show the item description. The only way that I can get around that, like if I wanted to say something like half of granite counter, something that, so that when I got to the bill part, I didn't have to remember that. But QuickBooks will always populate the item description here unless all of your item descriptions are blank. And that is kind of weird. It's weird to have all of your item descriptions blank unless you do just exclusively T&M billing and you really want to just type in descriptions at the time that you enter the bill and have it show up a certain way on the invoice. It's definitely an option. So let's just enter. Go ahead and enter the rate, and then here is your customer's invoice. That's pretty much it for this customer. And you can use T&M billing in all types of businesses. I've used it extensively for plumbers and electricians to help, especially in service professions, to help make sure that all of the time that gets entered gets billed to a job. And I'll show you in a minute how to run reports to make sure that happens. With time and materials billing especially, and also with service work, I mean, it is critical that all of your materials and all of your labor gets billed out, because if a piece of paper gets lost out of someone's truck, you could be out $400 or $500. I mean, $1,000. So it's absolutely imperative that if you're going to use this system, you don't count on it. And another thing I want to say about this is I haven't saved this invoice right now, but as soon as I do, these items will no longer be in my queue. So if I made a mistake on this invoice, I'm going to go ahead and save it. Let's look at, let me show you what I'm talking about. Go back to Chris Pepper's timesheet. Now we can see this time, bath remodel, it has been billed. If I delete this invoice, that time is not going to become unbillable. It's not going to go back. QuickBooks just doesn't have that ability. So it's very important that if you, for some reason, need to change an invoice, that you at least print it out and make sure you know what it is that you need to still bill the customer. Otherwise, it's just gone. Gone. No more times, no more cost, even though I deleted the invoice. I can, however, go back to the timesheet and make that time billable again. And I can also go back to the bill from the vendor, and I can make that billable again as well. But I'd have to know about it, and that's the tricky part. So I use a lot of different controls when I'm doing time and materials billing, especially if I'm doing it for a big job. Which leads me to the reports. Let's go to the report center. One of the things I actually do a lot when I'm doing time and materials billing, not so much for service work, but for big jobs, is I'll actually either keep a copy or file away all of the invoices and have a paper in a folder that I can compare my billing to make sure, just in case I made a data entry error. So you've got checks upon balances to make sure that you don't miss anything. So when I get done creating my invoice, invoicing my customer, I go to the folder of the bath remodel bills that have come in, and I compare and make sure that all of them have actually gotten on that invoice. The other thing that I do is use these reports. The reports that you're going to be working with in QuickBooks Premier Contractor Edition, they definitely recommend that you have. Or you can toggle to it from the accountant's version, which is what I have. You're going to find your reports under Jobs, Time, and Mileage, and also under Contractor. Let's take a look first at Jobs, Time, and Mileage. And because we're talking about the billing, I want to go back to one of the most important reports that I use every time I do a T&M billing. Let's say I just got done billing all my jobs for this 2-week period. I want to make sure when I get done, I run this report called Time by Job Detail to make sure that everything that should be billed got billed. One of the mistakes that I've made in the past is that I've put time under the main job, Adams, John, and Amy, and not the bath remodel, or maybe under some old job by mistake, just, data entry. There's quite a bit of data entry with this. And then that time, when I went to bill for the bath, it didn't pick it up, and it didn't get billed. And this is really a disaster. In order to avoid that, you get done billing, you go run your time by job detail report, and you see, okay, the bath remodel job, I just got done billing it, and here all of my time is showing as billed, and that's good. Maybe these jobs I don't care about, or maybe I haven't gotten finished billing with them. Or I could filter this just to show a certain job. But in any case, I like to see everything so that I can see if it got put under the wrong job. Like maybe this time was really supposed to be under bath, and the kitchen job is old and it's showing unbilled, and this is how to catch that. This report is also helpful in a lot of other ways. It's basically a breakdown by job, by item, that shows each employee's time on the job in detail. I've used this report a lot. This is one of my most used reports, time by job detail for sure, especially when I'm doing T&M billing. But it can be helpful for your analysis of past jobs as well. You just have to make sure that you're very consistent with entering your job time. If you always enter the owner's time and put it to jobs, great. But if you only do sometimes, then you might not be getting consistent reports. There's also the time by name, which is also a handy report. Now, maybe you don't want to pull in the time in the way that I showed you, because you don't want like framing and plumbing, and you don't want all this detail in the customer's invoice. You could use this report and just pull up each employee's time for each job and put that on a single line item. Or you could just do time by job summary if you just needed to lump it all together, just 106 hours on so-and-so's job. So these are really, really handy reports if you're using the time feature. Let's go up here to some of the other most used reports. The other most used report, I would say for me, is the Job Profitability Detail report. And this one automatically brings up this filter by job, which is really handy. And it only has 2 columns. It's got your actual cost column and your actual revenue column. That doesn't make this report helpful for everything, but it's kind of helpful for seeing where you're at on the job right now. Like, you're done with this phase, you're finished with that phase, or you can see, oh, I've got some costs here, and this is how much I've billed, and this is where I'm at. Kind of shows you where you're at with your billing and with your costs. For instance, if you knew that you were done with all of your framing and you had more framing costs than framing revenue, then you would know that you needed to bill out some more framing revenue, or if you'd already billed it all out, you'd know that you were upside down on framing. which would be a bummer. But that happens, and that's part of the reason for keeping this in such detail. Because once you've got labor and guys out there for hours and all kinds of material bills coming in, you can't keep track anymore of where you're at on each phase. And as you keep track of these things, you get better and better. The contractor gets better and better at bidding his jobs. I have had contractors who were consistently over in one phase or another, meaning that they were underbidding the framing, what it actually takes. And that's not information that you want to get after the fact, but it is good information to have. And you can also use this information, say, if you're starting to go over or you're getting close, you go, wow, I'm only 50% done with framing, but I'm at 75% of cost. So that gives you an opportunity to figure out what's going on. Is there a problem there? Do you have employees who are slacking off? Did you underbid the job? Is there anything you can do to save yourself? So that's the kind of thing that I find is really helpful in this report, the job profitability detail. The profit and loss by job, this is the only one that is not item driven. This is strictly income versus expenses, which is very interesting, especially for a certain period of time. You can see the bottom line. What was your profitability off of each job? The other report that's really helpful, this one, unbilled cost by job. Again, if you're really being strict about marking things billable or not billable, this is a great one to pull up and say, hey, what do I have in my system that should be billed out that isn't? The estimates versus actual detail is also great because this one shows us our estimated cost, our actual cost, and the difference. The estimated revenue, the actual revenue, and the difference. Because of the way that we've set up our estimate in this one, the estimated cost and the actual cost are actually, or the estimated cost and the estimated revenue are actually the same. But there are a lot of really good insights that you can get from this, because when you see this, you can see your total that you're billing for, that you're going to bill your customer, versus the actual that you're going to bill for your customer, rather than just seeing the cost versus the actual cost versus the actual revenue. And then you also get the estimated revenue versus the actual revenue, so you can see what you still have to bill out on the job. This is a really great and really helpful report for many, many reasons. And in many ways is a little more helpful than the job profitability detail. But this is where you see your items really come into play. This is the whole purpose for using your item. You use the item on your estimate. Then you use the item to actually create the bill. And we don't have the payroll cost that we had put in for that time. We don't have that because we haven't done our payroll yet. So even though we know we had time and we actually did some revenue for our labor, we don't actually have any cost for our labor. But this is how the item works. You use the item on the estimate. You use the item to record your cost. You use the same item to create the customer's invoice. And voila, you have this comparison. That's how job costing works in QuickBooks. It's completely item driven, and it's based on using the same item to record your costs as to bill your customer. I hope that this gives you some great insight on what you're looking for. And there's a lot of great reports in here. I would encourage you to review them and check them out. If you are a bookkeeper, the great thing about all of these reports is a lot of times your client or the contractor doesn't really want to look at a bunch of reports, but they have questions, and they want answers to their questions, and you can't give them answers, and that's where these reports come in. So as long as you're using the right processes and you're using your items, you as a contractor can get the information that you need, or you as a bookkeeper can provide that information to your client, the contractor. have any questions about I do not have any questions about reports. I am getting to the end of our time. Let me just look at my list to make sure I haven't forgotten anything. I hope that you've gotten what you need out of this today. I know I threw a lot of information at you, and I'm going to send you this recording. And there's so much more to learn. I do have an expert level live training class, a webinar just like this, that I'm going to be doing next Wednesday and the Wednesday after, same time, 1 o'clock Pacific time. They're going to be 2 hours each. We're going to take a break after 1 hour because it's just so much information. And in that advanced class, I'm going to be covering, we're going to go over the chart of accounts and take a look at a little bit closer look at your financial reports and how all of this falls into your financial reports and how you can use that to check your overall profitability and then drill down into the detail with these job cost reports. We'll also review the item list and answer any other specific questions that you have. I'll talk about class tracking and show you a little bit more about that workaround I was talking about or other ways of using classes in your business. We'll review estimates and invoicing, and I'll demonstrate the use of group items to conceal your details on your customer's invoice. I'll go over entering costs, including entering bills, credit card charges, handling petty cash transactions, or stock items that you want to get assigned to a job. There's a little workaround for that. That's the first day. On the second day, we'll go over payroll and how you can get all of your payroll costs assigned to your jobs, including the payroll taxes and your workers' comp. And that's a pretty big subject, but I'll be going over that. I'll show you how to handle change orders and customer deposits. I'll teach you how to handle retentions and work in process from a couple of different angles. The work in process really relates to your financial statement. Sometimes you need to hold over the entire job, and that's a pretty big workaround in QuickBooks. Or you need to, you want to look at your financial statement effectively each month, and I can show you how to use work in process for that, including a handy worksheet that I have. And we'll also review the job costing reports a little bit more and answer your question. I have a lot of bookkeepers today, and so if you sign up for my extended training class, my expert level training class, I'm also going to give you my the Builder's Bookkeeper, my 10 steps to building your own brilliant bookkeeping business, which is a retail price of $49. The 2-part extended webinar or extended training class I'm going to do is going to be $79. I'll also give you an option to add on my core training tutorial for just $49, which is a $50 discount if you're interested in that, or $20 off consulting, one-on-one consulting with me. Either way, it's an amazing bargain. I taught this class for $149, and the only other, I didn't find any webinars or live trainings on QuickBooks for Contractors recently, but I did find about a $300 tutorial. So I think it's a great deal, and if you want to learn more, I hope that you will join me. I'm going to email you that link. Actually, I'm going to put it up right now. If you have any questions, I encourage you to feel free to contact me, and I'd love to hear your feedback about today's webinar. If you're not already signed up for my free tutorials at QuickBooksNow.com, please do that. I don't spam the heck out of you, I promise. You'll get just a couple of emails talking about my tips and tricks, but you're not going to get a ton. I just will let you know the next webinar that I have. I plan on having one every month or so on different subjects. So if you're interested in other subjects, be sure to do that. Check me out on LinkedIn, on Facebook. QuickBooks Now is my page. I also have a group on LinkedIn called Bookkeepers Unite. And don't forget to email me with your feedback. I really appreciate it. Or if you want to have those lists. Thanks so much. Take care. Thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate it.